Hello and welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and I am looking forward to this conversation with an excellent photographer, underwater photographer, nature photographer, all kinds of photography, fellow dyslexic entrepreneur. It's hard to explain everything that Guesty does. Guesty's involved in understanding his back, his body, all sorts of different things are going to come out in this podcast. I've invited Guesty onto the podcast because he's got some really unique and interesting insights into dyslexia. So Guesty, it's great to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, Darius. Good to get the opportunity to chat to you about everything. We spoke a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and I think things have massively evolved since then.
Oh my goodness, yes, I forgot the first time we met was on the podcast, wasn't it?
Yeah, back probably lockdown time-ish, 2020,
Yes.
maybe?
Yes.
So that's,
yes.
well, it's 2024 now, isn't it? So 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been through a bit of a journey together. We did that podcast. We've been talking, learning from one another. I've done some coaching with you. You've been on a journey to discover your dyslexia and how to help other people with it as well, and how it affects you in your workplace, how it's advantageous, how when it gets in the way, and so on. So I know that you're going to share lots of really practical stuff that's kind of emerged over the time. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll rewind and join the dots.
Great. Yeah, so currently still am a photographer and filmmaker, but what has taken over is currently working with a thing called foundation training with a lady called Maura from Foundation Training Instructors UK. And I've started to teach and coach people after her 5 years ago helping to start put my back together and helping me kind of make space and kind of realign my body and kind of deal with loads of these chronic pains I was having in sciatica. So I'm kind of mixing between that. So I work teaching and coaching, and when we're teaching retreats, when we're on retreats, I'm helping organize. I'm doing the photography and film work on the side of it as I build up my confidence around coaching. And so coaching people or training people or teaching people how to do this foundation training. Yeah, so photography work's been a little bit slow, but in between the two, it's been quite a nice mix.
Okay. And the types of photography that you are doing and we're doing, a lot of underwater photography, is that right?
Yeah, a large predominant part of my personal work relates around surf photography and underwater photography. And then that started to bleed into paid jobs for that. Whereas other parts of it are whiskey companies for internal comms and external things, coffee roasteries, environmental NGOs, quite a big mix, some outdoor brands. It's been massively mixed. And then originally quite a lot within the Scottish folk music world. An ex of mine was a piano player, played for a friend Rachel, and I spent a lot of time on tour with them, doing a bit of driving, doing a bit of photography, which really was the kind of start of the photography world of someone getting me to do some work that would end up on the front of an album cover or on their socials or their website or promotional material.
And you're quite nomadic in the way that you're working as well, aren't you? You're all over the world. You work with Patagonia in the past, and you're flying here, there, and everywhere. Tell us a little bit about where you tend to move around.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has calmed down since the pandemic, but I did used to have a lot more travel. There'll be a lot of stuff in Europe, mainly Europe and Scotland, little bits further afield. And yeah, with some outdoor brands doing some sort of random repair things, we would drive around in a 4x4 with a tiny home and fix people's wetsuits or fix people's Gore-Tex jackets. And I would help document that story about that person and that garment, because actually people do have these romantic attachments to a jacket that their uncle climbed Everest in and then they gave it to them, or,
Yes.
they proposed to their wife in it, or, some lady went up K2, or they just go to the shops every day into the veggie market and it keeps them from getting wet when they live in Slovenia. It was totally random. So things like that. Yeah. And nomadic. Yes. Currently I am a tortoise without a shell. My van had an accident in Spain. Everyone was okay. And I'm currently without a van. So I've had 3 vans back to back. I'm 44 now. I've probably had vans since I was in my early 20s. So I am dealing with not having my little escape pod and my little cave on wheels. And it's been really challenging, a lot more challenging than I thought, actually.
Yes, yes. So we, in many ways, talked about your dyslexia story in the last podcast episode. So bring us up to speed about your kind of dyslexia story. Shall we concentrate on what's happened over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I think that the original story is there and people could dip back into it if they want to hear. But what's been kind of fascinating for me, and I think that's partly been working with you and some other coaching and counseling that I've done, is taking the tools. As the pandemic hit, everything changed, self-confidence dipped, all that kind of stuff, and just really was really unsure. Changed up my work, did some different things. And then as I got back into it, I started to do the coaching with you and realizing that this kind of sense of overwhelm that would hit me was pretty paralyzing. And it could be really detrimental. A lot of people on the outside will see me as this outgoing, chatty, happy guy. I suffer from bouts of depression, which a lot of the time can be pushed on by bouts of overwhelm. And this brain just gets so full because I've got so many ideas, there's so many plates spinning. And that's kind of where I came to you with that. I remember when we were on the podcast, you had said, "Oh, I've got this thing. I'm going to do this thing." And it's, and what you said at the start to where you're at now is completely different. But the core element was, I want to help people like you to be less overwhelmed. And that's that journey for the last 3 years that we've kind of taken together almost, or yeah, it's about 2 years, isn't it? Is that teaching me the skills that I didn't know, the simplest of things in a way have been kind of life-changing.
Yeah. Give people an example, because I remember right at the beginning, it's a bit funny, isn't it? Because you sit down and you think, right, okay, let's learn this organization system. I'm going to become organized and so on. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Yeah, this is not, yeah, I keep saying to people, organization systems are designed by organized people for organized people to be more organized. And this is like this approach is not about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. And there's a huge difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And we started with taking notes. And
Yeah.
at the beginning, you're kind of like, taking notes, is it not something a bit more advanced than this? But tell us about your note-taking journey at the beginning, because I remember it was quite a process for you and quite an epiphany at certain points.
Yeah, definitely. Because at first, when you were like, "Oh, we did that first session and we just did notes," I'm like, "Huh? I mean, this is good." And so, yeah, like I literally didn't really know how to take notes properly. I wasn't able to like get into the flow. And so you kind of explained this dyslexic mind. And through these sessions, you would get to know what worked with me, what didn't. You'd see me yawning and you'd be like, "I think we need to stop now." You could tell that my brain was just full and I was starting to process. So what was great was that you read the room and then I started to read the room with myself, not to get frustrated. And I think that was that thing, is like becoming more effective, not more organized or more precise or more efficient, like ditching all of those names and actually having to remind myself still of that is just minimizing all the nonsense, all the noise, and how to simplify it. Really looking at the tools and going, what do I actually need to use? And at the moment, for instance, notes is king and queen of my world. Not really using reminders. Yes, I've got calendar. There's not been very many meetings going on, so I haven't had to use Otter AI for transcription. But when I do, it's an absolute life changer, But the notes, and even now I've got really good at just doing my bullet point lists, starting that way. I don't even almost need to do that big brain download, although, I can just get these bullet points done. But when I'm really overwhelmed, I go, okay, I just need to dictate this to Otter AI or the voice note app if I've not got, cell reception so it can't work. Just get it out of my head, get it out of my body, because it's causing stress. And that
Yes.
stress and that overwhelm causes the anxiety. And that anxiety is just, I feel it, it's in the body. And then I'm irritated and I can spiral. And that has happened of late. I'll be totally honest. I've not been, I think it's important to say that, I'm not a master of this all the time. And I've not been in a great place recently. But I've been reminding myself and other people around me reminding me, hey, dump your brain, get into the notes. And it's helping, it's all part of that. You can speak to as many counselors and do all these things, but what are these things that I can have for myself? And that is, for me, Apple Notes or whatever platform you're in, just doing that thing, that journaling thing, I guess people talk about. But for me, just dumping the brain.
Yes. Yes. And isn't it interesting? This, because fundamentally in all of that is this principle of working memory. And, like with dyslexia, it affects the way you process information, but it also affects our working memory for many people. And this concept of working memory and understanding working memory, could you now explain to me and to those listening what your understanding of working memory is? You're not an expert per se, but just from your perspective, because you've got a beautiful way of understanding this and framing this and creating metaphors, and from your perspective, explain to us what working memory is been and your understanding of working memory as it's evolved over the last 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I think at the start, this working memory thing for me was kind of not hard to grasp, but I couldn't quite work it out. But I've always had this analogy of spinning plates, and that's quite a classic analogy. And you can only keep spinning so many things, and ultimately things start to fall off and smash. And there's this capacity that I have within my brain and with this working memory of mine, which when there's too much in there, it starts to overflow. It starts to be crowded and there's no space inside there. So I think the way that I think about it now is that I have that limited working memory capacity, but it's highly functioning. So the things that are in there still need to have space. I can't just jam it full. So, the tray isn't overflowing. It needs to be comfortable and I can walk at speed. 3 drinks on the tray, not 15. And I think that's where I'm starting to realize is to catch myself going, we've got too many things going on. And the ability to empty the working mind, working memory, to download these things and put them into a place like Apple Notes or like Notes so that I know that it's there and I can return to it. And it's in a form that is legible enough that I can let go and I can just concentrate on these 2 things. So maybe I can handle 3 things, but should I have 3 things in there? Should I just have 2? And that's what I think of now is like really having the minimal in there so that there's space for things to spin. But I know when I need to, because I've got that capacity with my brain, if I'm in the right place, sort of mentally, I can pack more in for a while. I can handle that. But then, hey, wait a minute, before we have a little crash, before we hit a wall, let's take a few things out.
Yes. And I remember you went through this process where there was a time you came back to me and said, hey, Darius, I know I would have crashed and burned by now through this dip, through what I've been. But because I was emptying my mind into notes as I was going along, I realized I've got more capacity to deal with some of these shocks. Could you talk us through that experience?
Yeah, that was quite interesting. And I wonder if it sort of links to, so by constantly or regularly dumping into these notes, it doesn't just give me this sort of extra cognitive space, energy. It also, I think, actually ultimately is helping me with kind of emotional regulation. So that overwhelm can then create large emotional experiences for me. I'm not diagnosed with ADD, but it's, with the counselors that I've worked with and other people work with, people have gone, I'd say. And so that's fine. I'm happy with that. But understanding that has also been helpful because when those 2 things transect, when dyslexia and ADHD have an overlap, as we've discussed and kind of theorized on things, and there's written work, there's the way we think about it, that can cause extra complications. And so understanding that, accepting that kind of ADHD idea and going, okay, cool. So for me, I thought I need to be extra vigilant about keeping space so that I've got the emotional capacity, the mental bandwidth to cope with things when they come in, because the life that I live can be quite erratic. So having space for those very changeable things to happen is important. And I missed that out recently. And I think that's, amongst other things, a thing that sort of pushed me a little bit into a sort of not so great place. But each time these things happen, I'm able to reel myself back in because I've got a bunch of tools to help me find that kind of center again.
Which is so what you've just described is you now feel equipped with the tool of taking notes and capturing these thoughts and getting them out your working memory. But sometimes you don't do it. And so that relates to the theme of automaticity, becoming automatic, but creating a habit of something and remembering to do it. And sometimes you know how to do it, but you forget that you know how to do it, and you forget the importance of doing it. And then someone comes along and goes, Guesty, why didn't you take a note of that? And you're like, gosh, yes, I should. How silly is that? Talk us a little bit about this automaticity, because we've been through a process with automaticity as well.
Yeah, that is fascinating and massively frustrating at the same time, because you get into this rhythm, you get into this flow, you're doing it, you're using it, it's really helpful. And then for whatever reason, attention span, more things come fill in, maybe you are spinning a bit too many in the way of plates. This forgetting of how useful these certain things are has been really classic through my life. And if I look at the patterns, I haven't found a trick myself, how I remind myself, but I guess the thing is with families, friends, partners, colleagues, learning to tell people, hey, I've got some blind spots has really helped me. If you see me like this, can you give me a little kick, a compassionate boot? Because I really never mind that if someone reminds me on email or phone or physically, just like, hey, you've forgotten this or that. Or, hey, have you done this recently? So I think the automaticity thing, like I really struggle with that, and more so than I realized. And it still fascinates me when I'm just sat there in this stew and someone goes, have a brain dump? Do you need to get this out of there? I do.
Yes. Yes.
And there's only so many, there's only so many reminders you can put on. There's only so many bits of tape I can write on my laptop or in the bulkhead of my van, and I guess over time they'll come or they won't. And I'll just keep learning,
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been acutely aware of the effects of automaticity on students over the last 7 years. Like I remember A grade students who mind map excellently, passed impossible exams, when they're like 14, 15 years old. And then a year goes by and the parents like, they didn't mind map this and they failed the exam. And they're like, well, why is this? What? It's like they've never learned it. And you tell them and they go, oh gosh, yes, I need to mind map this. That would be a good idea. And they just lost it, but it's still there. But they forget, out of sight, out of mind. It's often an ADHD trait as well, out of sight, out of mind. And the ability to develop a habit is incredibly hard, I just realized this with taking cold showers, believe it or not. Like I said to myself, I just want to take like a 20-second cold shower at the end of my hot shower. That's all I want to do. Okay. I'll do a hot shower, 20 seconds, half an 30 seconds, or maybe 40 seconds. I'll just do a cold shower. Do you know how many times I had to remind myself before it actually became a habit? I counted it. 155 days. 155 days was the day I saw my hand go up to that thing and hit the cold button and turned it to cold automatically without me having to go through the process of, Darius, remember, you've got to, this is your plan. This is why you're doing it. It's good for your skin. It's good for your face. It's good for this eczema, whatever. I didn't need to reason myself into it. I didn't need to remind myself. It just happened. And I actually think my number of repetitions is probably more around about 75, because after about 75 days, I said to myself, no, I'm going to do this absolutely every single day, no matter what. It's non-negotiable now. For the first 75 days, I'll say, oh, on the whole, 5 out of 7 days is fine. And so you give yourself a little bit of slack, etc. But so I'd say somewhere, how many repetitions do you think it takes for you to learn something as an automatic habit?
That is a fantastic question. And it's really great to hear that it took you that long, because it makes me feel a hell of a lot better about myself, because I really do give myself quite a hard time for it. I find it really frustrating. And actually, you know what? It's a really good question. I don't actually know. And that is something I'm going to go away from this and think about and try, because recently I was trying to take one supplement, one bottle, 4 pills, herbal supplement. I did amazing for a month, then fell off the train. How can I not? The bottle's there, in my van, it was there where I opened the door. When I was staying in a house, it was in the most obvious, irritating place. And I still would forget. So I would say I'm probably in that high 70s, 80s, 90s, I would imagine. And it's something I would love to learn how to do. And a lot of the time, the only way I can remember is big luminous bits of tape with black Sharpie. And even at that point, I think I start to become blind to that.
Yes, 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 absolutely. And so I think that's part of the sort of developing process for yourself. And because in many ways what you and I have done together, and what I'd encourage anyone who's listening, is to be really intentional about creating a process that fits your way of thinking. And sometimes when you're creating a process like the luminous tape, sometimes 30 times looking at it 30 days in a row, you start becoming blind to it. So you need to take it off and put it somewhere else, or you need to do it a different way. I'm going to take notes in a slightly different way, or I'm going to use speech to text more. I'm going to type this in more. I'm going to take photos more, or scan things in more, or whatever. And sometimes doing the same principle but in a slightly different way can sort of engage both aspects, stop you becoming complacent with it or bored with it, but still doing the same habit.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting. I think what you've touched on makes me realize that the next layer, the next level of this for me, the work we've done, is to work on that process. And that's the next layer of integration into my life, is what is that process? If I worked and lived out of the same place at a 9 to 5 or regular job, or something in that sense, I think that would be a lot easier. Now, I think I use that slightly as an excuse because I'm on the move, I'm in the van, I'm in hotels, I'm staying here, there, and everywhere. But there still is a daily process or practice of these kind of things I can have. And I think that's probably the next layer for me. And that'll change. I have it with a lady, Isabel, that I work with, who's kind of like a counselor, business coach. I work with her every 3 weeks to a month. And actually, as part of that, I wanted her to take some of her time out to make notes for me. And we share an Apple Note together. And after each session, she gives me summary of what we did, and then the bullet points and the action points, and then the evolution where we've gone on. So it's not always you need to work on this. What's changed? And we mix in and use a bit of Otter AI sometimes, and her notes so that she can reference with it, which is quite interesting. So yeah, so I think, to go back to your thing, is that that's the next layer for me, is to work out that process so that it's pinned in Apple Notes, because I love that actually, you can pin your top notes. And I've got like my to-do list, my Isabel, and process. Really, that should be the top one. And this is a balance with us. We had that chat with you when I was like, sometimes I just don't want to be on my phone, Darius. And that is a balance for me, because I've got an addictive personality. When it comes to devices, I am quite addictive with them, but I'm learning to just have total switch offs, and that's fine. Or just pick it up and do the downloads. So yeah, just working that process out, having that written out maybe in the van, move it about. I'm just sort of thinking at the moment now, like, oh, this is exciting. This could help me to stop forgetting these things quite so regularly.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com, which helps you organize yourself creatively with a productivity system for Apple devices. Okay, so we've talked about working memory, talked about automaticity. We're covering the 3 executive functions: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. And I think we don't talk a huge amount about this on the podcast too much with dyslexia, because executive function is normally associated with ADHD, but executive function is so important for both dyslexia and ADHD. In many ways is where they overlap, especially in the realm of working memory. So we've covered working memory. So you take notes to help you with your working memory. I keep saying take notes, make maps, set reminders. Yeah. Tell me your story with regard to either setting reminders or make maps.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I've really struggled with the reminders thing. And I think it is
Yeah.
something that I could evolve once again, but that comes in my notes. So I'll then set a kind of checklist of things to do, but probably I still forget and still to go back. So again, that's probably a bit of a hole for me. So actually getting in and setting some reminders would be good. Now, I do set reminders on my calendar a lot to just give me a buzz to remember to do something. Because I guess, again, with me, it's almost like 3 apps is almost too much.
Yes.
But maybe if I really was to give reminders a bit of a go, part of the process, that reminder setting is at night before I put my phone off, after dinner or before dinner. What do I need to remember for tomorrow? So yeah, I've struggled with that element, but totally get the concept. I've just not managed to integrate it as yet, or I kind of bypass it and go into the calendar, and then calendar is a bit messy. But again, something that was great for me was Google Calendar as opposed to the iCal, because Google Calendar has this brilliant day view and the way I can also look at the month. So that's also really good for me, is having that really visual representation. And I have 3 solid blocks of color. One is work, one is social, and one is self-care.
Excellent. So the whole setting reminders side of things, this is turning into a bit of a coaching session. I hope you don't mind it.
Quite all right.
I'm just going into coaching mode here, but I'm thinking in general about setting reminders in a much broader, more dyslexic sense. So if you think about setting reminders on multiple levels, okay, and let's just break the mold by thinking about a vision board. Okay. A vision board is something where you drop lots of pictures onto a piece of paper or a canvas, a digital canvas of things that are important to you, goals, dreams, ambitions, aspirations. But in a way, a vision board is a way of setting a reminder. It's a visual reminder of what's important to you. So if you had one page and it's just a visual reminder of all the things that are important to you, your wife, going for walks, going, doing the cold showers, or a health goal or a financial goal or whatever, these are just reminders, as it were, but visually. And then you've got it all the way down to remember to put the bins out Wednesday, 7 p.m., which is on your recurring reminders on your reminders app, or a post-it or a sticky on the wall to remember you to take your tablets, and everything in between, calendar events in between, and maybe even goal setting in between that. These are reminders of what your goals are. So the whole principle of setting reminders is just I think, quite a nice, useful term, as long as you allow it to be broader. I think sometimes we can hedge ourselves into thinking it's just the reminders app, but it's often more. So how do you find you set reminders? How do you use your visual abilities to remind you of what's important?
Oh.
And how have you seen that evolve over the last few years, whether you're conscious of it or unconscious of it?
I think, I guess, visual reminders, even looking at Apple Notes and thinking about how I did all the folders and then put emoji cons beside them,
Yeah.
that helps me to remember to go in, because it breaks it up from a bunch of words. Again, I think it's something that I need to work on, or I'd like to work on. I think visually for me, the reminders thing ends up just being in the calendar, and that's got too messy. So I've taken it out the calendar.
I think you're being too hard on yourself. I think you're being too hard on yourself, Guesty. Yeah. Let me just open your mind. Let me just think about something that you told me. You, at one point, you got all your camera equipment out and you laid it out, and you got onto this thing about structuring and organizing your camera equipment and so on. There was something happened where you started to organize stuff digitally. You then started to organize stuff physically, and it had this cascade effect where you started to, and in a way that ended up being a visual reminder of how to organize yourself. Tell me a bit about that and other examples like that.
Great reminder. Yeah. So as we went through the process, probably 50% way through, like our week 6 or something, when we were working together, I suddenly had this urge or this realization that there was a lot of mess in my world. And there's always been a lot of mess. Like, if I can't see it, I don't know I have it, was my kind of mantra. And over the years, I've been abstracting a lot of things, selling things off, throwing things away, recycling stuff, just giving away things that I do not need. And then with camera equipment, I had this new box arrive. I found a secondhand box with all these lovely dividers. And I just made everything fit. So everything had the perfect place. Everything was in little zip pouches. All the zip pouches had exactly what they was in them, with different neon tape. And it was so satisfying because I could drop into the box, or I could tell an assistant if I was on a shoot where something was, or anyone where anything was. And then that kind of cascaded into the next thing, which was my storage as a shipping container, or was someone's garage. And then I turned it into a shipping container. And in that shipping container, I bought exactly the same gray boxes, had different colors, luminous tapes and Sharpies, and just everything was detailed in there in this kind of monosyllabic gray, but I knew where everything was. And every time I go back to that, I keep abstracting that. I keep minimizing it. I guess I could almost see why some folk on the neurodivergent spectrum probably go down that kind of almost minimalist route, because the less noise and confusion there is around you, the easier it seems to be to function. There's less friction. And I think, like, the more I take, and I think you've taught me a lot of this, is where's the friction? Where's the most friction? What can you do to help ease that friction or get rid of that friction? Can you do something about it? Then do something about it. Yeah, so that part of that process was brilliant, where a few people were like, who are you? A bit organized. Yeah, it was kind of funny, especially my mum and a couple other friends are just like, this is not you. And actually realizing I am quite specific in my camper van, things have a place. And I realized that I really needed to keep that camper van super clean, in the sense of, same with the boxes, same lot of boxes, same lot of tape, to the point that when I build the next van, I've even thought further to that I will build the van around a classic thing called a Euro box, a Euro container, which is this perfect size that can work in all sorts of different orientations, that works on a pallet. And so you can pallet things around Europe. I don't want to do that, but these boxes are these sort of perfect sizes. So I can sort of see myself, that little bit of OCD, or the want to be OCD almost, creating the next van basically by using these boxes, because then I know I'll have my life in all the right little places.
Tell me more about these Euro boxes. Sorry to go on it. What size and dimensions are they?
Oh, they're like 800 by 400, 600 by 400. So like they'll stack on each other. They'll have lids. They're gray.
Yes.
They're like perfectly 90-degree angles. They don't fit into each other, but they sit on top of each other.
Can you stand on them? Is it those ones that are so strong that the plastic, you can stand on them as well?
If you flip them upside down, you could almost stand on these ones, but close to it. But they are just,
Right.
for anyone who's into organization, they're magic.
So isn't that fascinating, Guesty? Okay, so you are starting to beat yourself up there about how, oh, I'm not very well organized at the moment and so on. And yet there are certain areas where you're now taking for granted how structured and organized you are, and it's fitting you, you know? And it would just be interesting to just go a little bit deeper into, why is it working in those areas and why do you feel it's not working in some other areas? You know, like, what, because it seems to me that it's playing to some of your strengths, you know, the practical, the physical, the visual, you know, the yeah.
It's a really good point. And I think actually, like, also wrapped into this is probably, it's worth talking about that inner critic. And I think
Yes.
that's very strong in me. I'm very hard on myself. That comes, I guess, from the history of school when I was younger. You know, I had great support of mum and dad and parents, but had a terrible time at school. And that kind of not good enough bubbles up. And that comes into those things of these realizations with these kind of organizations. And why am I good at it with that? It's big and clunky and they're boxes and it's a shipping container and it's metric and it just makes sense. And I think with thoughts and ideas and in creative processes, it's getting there, But what you're making me think is that actually if I can take that concept of the Eurobox into my digital mind in that realm and think about it a bit more like that, be a bit more kind of creative with that, that might help me in that realm. And there's something incredibly satisfying about it when you've got a whole bunch of gray boxes. Like, the extra nerdy bit is that under all of these gray boxes, they're stacked 5 to 6 high in the shipping container. They all have a dolly with wheels on it so that they can all move out and move around. Potentially a bit of a silly expense, but I'm sharing a shipping container with a friend. So we split it 50-50. And it means I can move things about. That looks after my back, so I'm not constantly dragging things around. So yeah, there's like I get quite nerdy with that stuff. And so probably what's, to think about it is that looking at things like, I guess a really good thing to talk about actually would be Miro. When you helped me with my website, was fascinating. We used Miro, what is the best way to explain what that kind of system is? It's a
digital whiteboard.
Digital whiteboard. And you gave me the concept of, here's this massive digital whiteboard, and here is these frames, these tables, create a table. And I would throw all my images onto the table, but within that table, I'd have this clean space. And you taught me that is this clean space. It's just the right things in just the right place. They go in there, and everything else can sit around outside and you can see it. So you're not constantly opening folders, dropping things in. And it means that when I show it to anyone, they can have a look at what I've done, but they can also have a look around the table and go, oh, well, why haven't you put that one in there with that one? That looks great. And so that kind of, I guess that's taking that digital sorting of boxes and shipping containers into that digital realm of, here it all is. And actually, I thought that would be really overwhelming, but it's not. It took me to a really good stage with that website. And I think it's also worth saying that I have this 85% thing. To get to 85%, that last 15% is incredibly hard for me. Sometimes it can almost be like an imaginary or invisible wall. Why can't I do that? Why can't I get past that? And that's that thing of needing a process, needing to remember the tools, but then also learning to ask and ask for help, which is something I got taught from a very young age. And I go through stages of being able to do it and not. And a lot of that can be linked to what my self-worth is, what the inner critic's doing at the time, But when I do reach out and I do ask for help, I'm so grateful that I've gone and done that and proud of myself. I'm like, oh, you asked, that really wasn't that hard.
Yeah. So I remember when it was coming up to the Miro experience, I kept saying to you, we need to learn how to make maps, And you're like, Darius, but I don't get the mind mapping side of things. It's not clicked with me. And I said, it doesn't need to be a mind map. All we're aiming for is having everything you need in one place so you can see it all at once. And that's the thing about the shipping container, isn't it? You can walk into the shipping container and you can see all the boxes, all the labels all at once. Or you go into a workshop and you've got your workbench, you've got your tools up in the corner, you've got your materials. There's something about this visual spatial, you can see everything at once. You feel, right, I've got the big picture, I'm not juggling so much. And we kind of recreated that with Miro, didn't we? We say, right, Miro is going to be your workshop. You're going to have all your materials lying around the place, but then you're going to have a space in the middle, like you described, where it's like the thing you're working on, that craft space that you're working on, the end result. And so you've got your materials and your result, but you could see everything at once. And you found that really quite transformative, just to be able to see everything at once. And I think that principle of being able to see everything at once in one space is so important.
Agreed. And I think, with that shipping container, an important thing for me as well is to remember to not overfill it. So there's a little bit of self-control, because you still need to be able to move and see things. And so keeping an eye on that. But no, that was a really transformative experience of that thing, because it took that negative experience or that negative thing of me being messy. That was always like, and my mum was really good for it. She always tried to make me tidy a room. I mean, every kid gets told that, but she really knew how important that was for my brain. But I was a belligerent teenager and didn't. And even into my 20s and 30s, just really struggled with it. But noticing when I do organize things, so within that dumping zone, it's relatively organized as well. It's like, there's the photos of fishing, there's the photos of octopus, there's the photos of whiskey. They're in organized clusters, but those
Mm,
clusters aren't just a complete mess. So yeah,
mm.
I think that's a really great process, and actually just about to start that process again with a different website for foundation training for what we're doing, along with Maura and Isla. And I suggested this board. Isla's brilliant with, loves her sticky notes. She's a project manager. Me and Maura definitely not quite like that. But I was like, well, what about this space? Could we throw everything, get everything to Google and then throw everything into this space and then start creating what we want to visualize? And that process to them, for non-divergent individuals, were like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do that. That'll be really easy to understand. And I think also this kind of concept for me feels less overwhelming. One of the most overwhelming things for me is my Dropbox. It is messy. I still dream of being able to just give my Dropbox login to some AI or a human and just go deal with this. I don't know if it would actually be able to do it, but it's pretty messy. And so being able to then pull things out, put it into this big space, I think is really helpful.
So we've covered take notes, make maps, set reminders, which are the three main things that we keep coming back to, because taking notes helps your working memory, helps you capture useful information, stop it escaping. Making maps helps you be adaptable and flexible, cognitive flexibility, and just adapt. And then setting reminders helps you focus on what you think is important at that time. And we kind of need a balance between all those three. What advice would you give to other people who are kind of going through that experience of, I know I've probably got some dyslexia or maybe some ADHD, or, I'm a bit neurodivergent, and going through this whole process, because you've been very intentional over the last, how many years would you say, where you've started to be very intentional about how it might be affecting you and how you can play to your strengths and deal with some of the weaknesses or challenges?
I'd say it's sort of 4 or 5 years. And there were some kind of critical events that kind of pushed me over the edge, which made me realize, oh, I need to sort this out. A bunch of images I'd shot for someone, a brand over the years, and then was kind of told that they couldn't really use them because it wasn't the right usage waiver. And, all these little organizational bits were a nightmare for me. And that was just crushing. Thought, right, I need to get on this. And also starting to realize, so I'd say it's,
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. I didn't know that story. Explain that to me a little bit more.
so yeah, I was working, doing a lot of photos for someone, and basically I had the wrong image release waiver. And so those
Oh,
images weren't able or aren't able to be used because that waiver is ultimately the wrong legal document.
put in all this amazing work and none of it can be used because you used the wrong waiver document.
Very little could be used, which
Classic
was,
dyslexic moment, isn't it?
yeah. And whether it was me, whether it was them, it's still a bit here nor there. But, ultimately that is down to me as the photographer to have that image release waiver. So that was really frustrating. And I just wanted to minimize that, to stop things like that happening. I think the advice I would give people is, be kind to yourself, be very compassionate to yourself, start to look into it, start to look at people to talk to about it, find fellow dyslexics, look into the coaching side of things and see what you can do. Like, the best thing I have done is engage with other people to help me get the coaching. Yes, it costs money, but there is the ability in the UK, there's this access to work grant, which can really help people, which is fantastic. But for me at the start, it was a lot of things. It was, stopping drinking, stopping spending on all sorts of things to prioritize, realizing that this is really important. And it can be
Mm.
a bit overwhelming to start with, but just believe me, like, it is a really liberating experience. It will take time. It's frustrating. You will come up against yourself and it will be challenging, but that challenge, I believe, is worth it because the reward is more cognitive space, more sort of emotional resilience that you can build around these things. And I also think for people that, I'm a big proponent and, I don't know, cheerleader for counseling. All these things go along hand in hand. And while I was doing coaching with you, I was working with Isabel, which is kind of like business mentoring / counseling coaching. It's really hard to explain quite what that is, but ultimately counseling. And having those two things side by side were great. That really, really helped me. And that took a financial investment, but that was this investment I was in making in my future. And that future for the people around me, my family, my friends, my partner, I need to do these things because a lot of these people are the ones that end up mopping up when I spin out. Yeah, and just go easy with it. It can be really fun. Like I really enjoyed the coaching with you. And some weeks at the start, I was like, I don't like get this. Stick with it because it's absolutely worth it. Someone like you needs to learn someone like me to know what is best. And I love that about what you did was sometimes you just be like, I don't think this is working. Leave that. And we try something else. Like not everything is going to work straight off the bat. And I think I'm a really impatient person that kind of wants things to be like immediate, but sometimes you just got to do some trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. This podcast isn't like a pitch to try and get you all to start getting me as your coach, etc. Far from it. The purpose here is, I think what essentially is, get out there and get some help, whether whoever it is, with some experience with dyslexia or ADHD. And I think I sometimes wonder to myself, am I making too big a deal out of this dyslexia and ADHD difference? Is this going too far? How helpful is this? Is it, and more and more I realize that actually that was really helpful. And that was really helpful. And this just becoming more self-aware of where your strengths and limits are. For some people, it might be various different emotional experiences, mental health. It could be physical. There's all sorts of self-awareness that you need. I think some of the biggest wins are just understanding how to deal with working memory. It's so ridiculously simple, isn't it? I mean, it's just so ridiculously simple.
And yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point that like, let's strip this all back and let's go back to the thing of exactly what you said. It's just like the simple understanding and building of self-awareness is fascinating. Now, it can be quite triggering. It can be quite challenging at first because then you start to notice yourself. But then when you start to realize that that's okay, this is the way I am. And so are hundreds of thousands of other people. I am not alone. And I just need to learn this. And so that self-awareness around that, and then being able to observe your ADHD, your ADD, your dyslexia a little bit from a distance and go, oh, I'm doing that thing. As opposed to, oh, damn it, I'm doing that thing and feeling bad about going, oh, I'm doing a Guesty. I'm doing a Mike. Okay, what do we need to do? And that takes time, but it will come. So I think you're right. And also like, I sometimes wonder if I make too big a deal about it. I find myself like I'm always talking to people about it because I noticed something in someone. We were at a wedding a week ago and I clicked in with this guy and I was like, man, I get on with him. There's just like a buzz. There's a connection. And at one point I was talking about dyslexia and ADD and stuff. And he was like, yeah, I'm dyslexic. I was like, huh, are you? And my partner was like, I never knew that about him. I've known him 10 years.
Yeah.
But there's this radar that you get with people.
Yeah.
And I do know that I probably bang on a little bit too much about it. But I know that having these conversations, whether they're online, they're in a sauna, they're walking down the street, they're in a queue, whatever it is, you can help. And I don't want to sound like you can help change people's lives by giving them little tips. And that's what people have done all of my life is people have laid the breadcrumbs. I've followed the breadcrumb, tried it out, works for me, great, carry on. And I think just, what you do and what anyone that does that talk about it, just laying those breadcrumbs is a really good thing. And when you start to have those conversations, it can make you feel you can feel a lot less alone because you can feel really alone in this world of neurodivergence because the way that the brains work is so complex and so different. And I know for some people it's challenging, and it's not always the right way to put it, but sometimes I do feel like it's a superpower. But that can be really polarizing for some people. They're like, no, I struggle every single day. I'm stressed. I'm anxious. How dare you call it a superpower? And I've learned to think about that and go, okay, yeah, that's not right for everyone. But I think what it is, and I think one of the explanations you gave that was fantastic was it's a precision tool. And that precision tool has a manual, but that manual has to be created by yourself and someone else. Because you might be on tool 7, but you've got manual number 2. Useless. So creating this simple, abstracted kind of instruction manual for yourself that will evolve and will change because that tool is like a sort of, I don't know, a kind of an alien being, an AI, and all sorts of things. It's not a structural physical tool. It will evolve, and as will that kind of that user manual evolve. And I think that's kind of exciting. Can be a bit overwhelming, but it's kind of exciting to think I've got this precision tool and I can work towards that. Or I've just got this different way of thinking and I can get help with how I think differently, and I can have these, little tools. And you can take as much of it as you like or as little of it you like. If you just start with Apple Notes and start dumping down that, awesome. Great start. And from there, you might get to the point and go, okay, well, I've got all these. What do I do now? Pop it into ChatGPT, get it to compress it down, get the spelling done for you, spit out the themes that are going on. With Isabel, the counselor, I put all of her notes from the year into some AIs, different ones, compressed it down, and then popped it into your mind mapping software, and then popped it out to her. She was fascinated. She's like, "Oh, this is great." And so, that's going to be a yearly process of doing that with her.
Yes, yes. So for those of you who are listening, let me just outline some of the things about Apple Notes that I think are really useful to just do as a quick checklist, First of all, using speech to text and just talking with the microphone button and just talking out and typing things out is really useful. Using the checklist function in Apple Notes, scanning a document in Apple Notes, scanning multiple pages of a receipt or a PDF, saving a PDF into it, taking screenshots instead of screenshotting directly into your camera roll and filling up your camera roll with all these junky screenshots that you're constantly scrolling through for like 10 minutes to try and find the last screenshot that was important. Save the screenshot directly into Apple Notes with 3 keywords that you can search and find it. And then if you've got that screenshot, there might be some other bit of information you can append to that note. And then that screenshot grows into this kind of manual that Guesty's kind of talking about. So you create these kind of growing little documents that sometimes you might want to add a PDF or a little checklist of thoughts or whatever, and it can grow according to different modes, multimodal. You could add in a voice note, you can add in a video, you can add in a photo. So that's the beauty of saving it into certain buckets. And in a way, the Apple Notes are like these plastic buckets that you can throw stuff into, boxes, and they grow and you can rearrange them and organize them. So in many ways, when we're talking about Apple Notes, that's the sort of thing we're talking about, is just learning to use it as this universal bucket to just dump stuff into. And whether you use Notion or Obsidian or Google Docs or whatever, you can use it with all of these things because it's just this bucket to empty your working memory into. You can then use it to organize your life, but the core thing, in my opinion, is empty your working memory so you've got a clear mind for the next thing that's coming towards you.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'd say that is the key thing that I've learned and experienced over the time, is that bring it back to the basics, dump the brain, however I feel like doing it, whether it's typing, voice note, like you say, or whatever that is just get it out there. From that point, it evolves.
I know we've not got that much time left together. So let's talk about the physical aspect of things because,
Mm.
there's this relationship between the mental and the physical, and you're really into this foundational training and so forth. And I think while we've got you on the podcast, it's going to be worthwhile to talk about that. So you've got these back problems or had these back problems, and if you've got a tense mind, it can create a tense body, and there's a relationship between it all. So talk us through a little bit about mind and body and
Yeah, definitely. I think it's best to explain kind of from my perspective what goes on with me. And so my back lower right of my sciatic area, so the my lower back is where loads of emotion and stress goes. My stomach, my solar plexus. Again, when things go to pot, my stomach becomes bad. I end up with, all sorts of stomach issues. I end up with a very crushed kind of posture. I'm rolled over, my shoulders are down, my head's forward. I'm compressing this whole part of my trunk where all my organs and everything live. And I'm letting everything hunch over and my neck's pushing forward. What I've started to realize, and I am not the first, there's so much documented around it, is that we hold stress and emotions within our body. And some of that stuff is way back into history, trauma wrapped into layers and layers of our body. And so when we start to work with the body to start to open it up, to start to create space, and space equals safety. We're making safety and space for our nerves and all the fluids to move, and for our body to bring our body back into this natural way of moving, the way it was meant to move, not sat at a seat, driving. We do all these things, but how can we unwind this? And I think one of the other processes actually, which is really good to point, is that the counseling, the working with you, and this movement, learning how to take myself out of chronic pain, because I had debilitating sciatica, terrible shoulder, couldn't work, couldn't surf, so lack of self-esteem gone. For me, it's really important to get into my body. When I'm in an anxious state or I'm not feeling great, I need to force myself to lie down and get into what we do and what we teach with foundation training. And again, I'm not just trying to sell this. I tried everything before this and it didn't really work for me. But this was this thing that helped me learn how to make this space. And so it's very biomechanical, it's very physical, it's muscles, it's muscle chains. But at the same time, it's more than that. It's about those emotions. Because if I'm doing all the good work, but I'm still really stressed and I'm really worried about something and I'm putting something off, if I don't deal with that, for me, potentially, this pain is going to stay because I'm holding it in there. And again, I'm really at the start of learning this. My partner, Maura, has, been on this kind of journey for 9 years teaching this, and more that she teaches it, she starts to see it with more and more clients. As they unwind the body, they unwind emotions and stresses. And I think it all works really well hand in hand, because as we know, body, mind, stomach, soul, it's all one.
it's all connected.
It's
Yes.
all connected. And if we think it's not, we're just kidding ourselves. And I definitely was there for a long time. And the more I let myself think about it and be open to that, the better things seem to get, the more sense things seem to make. And it's an onion. Keep peeling off a layer, find something new, there's no silver bullet, but all these little different bits, and whatever it is for you, if you're out there listening, start having a play. Don't go too crazy and do them all at once. Start little, start getting bite-sized chunks and see what works with you. We talk about sowing the seed, sow the seed, see how it is, let it grow, don't dig it up, keep watering it and keep working with it.
Yeah, I want to share something with you, Guesty. I felt humiliated this week, okay? And it was such a strange experience because I had to fill in a form, okay? And I had to fill in this form to take my trailer to the local council tip, okay? And as I was filling in the form to register my phone, my car, my trailer, I just felt such a sense of anger, And I just got more and more angry going through this form. And at the end of it, I was like, why am I feeling so angry about this? And I just took a step back and I realized I'm feeling humiliated by this process. Because on the face of it, it's like, oh, just fill in this form to register that you're bringing your car in and dumping just some basic household stuff that's in my trailer. And that's how it was presented to me. Yeah, just go onto the website, click on the form and register your car and bring it in, and no problem. 12 to 15 steps later, I'm still trying to make this thing work, And, they send me a 3-page, 3 swipes up email saying with instructions on what to do. And I turn up at the tip, at 9:30 a.m. And he goes, "Oh, the email said it's between 10 and 12." And I'm like, I'm dyslexic. I don't read a 3-page email just because you've got a notification and it's got all this counsel small print all the way through. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm dyslexic too, but you've got to give me some proof of identification, proof of this, and where's your this and that." And I'm like, I'm coming to the tip to just drop some rubbish off. This is harder than applying for a driving license. And I realized at the end of it, it was like, there was, it just made you feel humiliated. That it's like, for goodness sake, what's the big deal? Can't you just manage with this? I realized to myself, how often in school are children just humiliated every single day? They're just like, "Well, what's the big deal? Get over yourself. Just do this, just do that." And you're like, I don't understand it, why I find this hard to do. And you internalize it. You blame it on yourself. And you know what? I think you start internalizing it into your body as well. I have eczema. I internalized it into my skin. Other kids have got stomach problems. They internalize it into that, or knee problems, or inflammation problems, or whatever. There's all sorts of ways you can internalize this stuff. And I suspect that even as you go through this and you start realizing, I realized I am angry right now, and I don't know why. I just felt really angry. I was starting to have a bit of a go at this guy in the council. And I was like, I'm really getting angry here. And it's not commensurate with, you just had to fill in a form. What's the big deal? It was bringing up other emotions from 54 years of having to fill in forms that are so frustrating.
Yeah, and I think there's some amazing work. And again, I'm kind of reading a lot of stuff from the likes of Gabor Mate and this whole concept of, this inner child. And that's these things that can really pull this out of us. And I think you're right. I think we can end up making ourselves really, really ill. And that really is the feeling. And if you look at lots of stuff that's going on at the moment, research, books that are being written, podcasts talking about it, how that affects us and how that stress and anxiety can create illness and disease. And so if we learn to do these things, I truly believe, like whether it's the body movement stuff and the mind dumping and the kind of emptying all of this out of this vessel and create more space, well, we will create more safety. And I want to talk more about it, but I don't know so much at the moment. And I'm excited to kind of investigate it. And I'm really lucky that I've got a partner that's very into that as well. And it's been really fun to try and kind of investigate that together. And I think you're right, like the way we talk to ourselves, the way we feel, the way we feed into that brain, then perpetuates and affects down. And the same, I really feel for those kids because I know what I experienced when I was younger and how detrimental that was for me. And it can only be a few comments could really hurt a kid. So I think, more compassion.
So in the last few minutes, Guesty guided you with lots of questions and so on. Was there anything that you felt that you really wanted to share with people before coming on the podcast? What was on your mind?
No, you know what? I really feel like we've actually hit more things than I thought we would. And we really got into this last part. And that last part is something that is really fascinating. And I just maybe want to say about that is don't get too worried about that, people. Just there's some great reading to do. Look into the likes of Gabor Mate. I think he's got some fantastic books that really, in a really easy or accessible way to understand. And some of his podcasts are lovely that he's been on. And I think, be compassionate with yourself, be kind with yourself, know that you're an awesome human and you can achieve great things if you want to achieve great things, or you can just achieve surviving and doing what you want to do and taking it easy. Like, you don't have to do the Richard Branson, you don't have to do the entrepreneur thing. Like whatever it is you want to do it and ask for help, reach out and don't be afraid.
Great, Guesty. Thanks for that. Well, maybe we'll do another podcast in the next 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah, recap, see where we're at.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
thank you, Darius. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It's always so helpful to have these dialogues because it helps me learn a lot about myself. Every single time I talk about this, I go, oh, there's a something. So yeah, thank you.
And it's been quite nice talking dyslexia with one another. You know, it's interesting. You can often tell a person's got dyslexia by the way they talk. You learn to notice the way they talk. They tend to talk in circles, but it's not completely circles. It's like they're spiraling around something, they're scanning something, they're doing a 360, CT scan of a subject or a topic and so on. And once you get into that flow, like this podcast, you realize, oh gosh, this is working from the outside in rather than the inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully put. Great, Darius. Well,
Great.
thank you very much.
Till next time. See you, Guesty.
See ya.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.